Good morning, everyone. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for those joining us live and to those listening in afterwards. I would like to warmly welcome our guests today that I will be shortly introducing in a moment. So our webinar today is entitled Medical Cannabis and the Role of the Pharmacist, a Global Overview. This webinar will explore the evolving role of pharmacists in the dispensing of medicinal cannabis and address the increasing demand for pharmacist involvement in this emerging therapeutic area. The importance of this topic lies in its unique responsibilities of the pharmacists they have in patient education, dispensing, monitoring, and ensuring ethical standards. By addressing the pharmacological effects of cannabinoids, global regulatory frameworks, and challenges for pharmacists, this event will equip pharmacists with the tools to navigate the complexities of medical cannabis use while highlighting the need for ongoing education and training in this evolving field. So it would be my pleasure to moderate the session. So as you can see on my slide, I'm the global lead for the FIP Development Goal 10, Equity Equality. I'm also a professor and a researcher at the Faculté of Pharmacie, Laval University in Canada. And my research work is dedicated in oncology, psycho-oncology, and palliative care. It focuses particularly on advancing holistic and personalized approaches to pain management, particularly in patients facing complex conditions like cancer or associated psychiatric challenges. So as pharmacists, we play a crucial role in bridging science to practice. And today's discussion promises to shed light on global perspective and the evolving role and responsibilities of pharmacists in managing the use of medical cannabis. So it would be a very interesting webinar to start with. So as you can see on the slides, we have some announcement to do before starting the webinar. So please note that this event will be recorded, live streamed on FIP YouTube, and the recording will be available on events.fip.org. To all those listening, please feel free to send your questions through the Q&A box provided, and I'll do my best to manage all the questions. So at the end, we will be able to address those questions. You are welcome to provide any feedback to webinar@fip.org. And I'll take also note this opportunity to promote the benefits of membership with FIP, including events and webinars. FIP, as you know, is the global body representing over 4 million pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists. So if you're a pharmacist or a pharmaceutical scientist and you would like to become a member, please register on FIP website at fip.org. So for this event, we are joined by a panel of fabulous speakers, and I want to sincerely thank each of them for taking the time to prepare the presentations. Unfortunately, Dr. Bandana will not be attending live due to time differences. She's in Australia, but she sent a pre-recorded video, which we will be playing during this webinar. So to start with today's program, so welcome. We will start with a welcome and introduction, and then we will move to the pharmacological and clinical effects of medical cannabis by Dr. Kari Franson from the Pharmacist Cannabis Coalition in California, USA. We will move forward to the medical cannabis, the role, responsibilities, and challenges for pharmacists by Dr. Carlos Lacava, Medical Cannabis Program Coordinator at the Ministry of Public Health in Uruguay. Then we will finally review the video of Dr. Bandana with the pharmacist's views on medical cannabis snapshot. So she's from the University of Sydney, Australia. Finally, we will go over the questions that you might have or additional questions for the different presenters. And definitely we will wrap up and have a short conclusion before the end. So today's learning objectives, we have a number of learning objectives for this webinar. At the end of the presentation, you will be able to explain the pharmacological mechanisms of cannabinoids and their clinical application in the use of medical cannabis. You will be able to identify the common side effects and safety considerations that are associated with short and long-term use of medical cannabis. You will be able to discuss the role of the pharmacist in patient education regarding cannabis dosage, administration, and monitoring of potential drug interactions, to examine the ethical and clinical responsibilities of pharmacists in ensuring the safe and effective use of medical cannabis. And then finally, you will be able to evaluate global perspectives on the role of pharmacists in dispensing medical cannabis and the challenges they face, such as educational gaps, regulatory frameworks in different countries. So to start with the first presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kari Franson. She's a professor of clinical pharmacy and in California. So as a brief introduction, Dr. Kari, she's a PharmD, PhD, BCPP, and she's actually professor and associate dean for academic and student affairs at the University of Southern California School of Pharmacy. She received her PhD from UCSF and PhD in medical education from Leiden University, the Netherlands. Dr. Franson is a US board certified psychiatric pharmacist and a Dutch certified clinical pharmacologist. She worked with geriatric psychiatric patients for more than 10 years and has performed a variety of clinical studies, spanning those in early phase clinical pharmacology to post-marketing clinical efficacy studies. She's interested in cannabinoids' clinical pharmacological effects and cannabis user safety, and she has guided national and international professional, legislative, and media and commercial groups on the wise use of cannabis. So I'm happy to give you the floor to explore the pharmacology and clinical effects of medical cannabis. The floor is yours, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you. And hello, everybody. It's great to be here today. I have a lot to cover, so I'm going to just jump right in. So the first thing is I'm here to talk about the pharmacological and clinical effects, which is, like trying to cover everything that steroids do in 15 minutes. So it'll be a little tough. The first thing we need to start off with is recognizing that there is an endocannabinoid system in our bodies. Many of us might not have learned about this in school because of really our understanding of this is really started to expand since the late 1990s. But it's a system that's found in all vertebrates, and we pretty much focus on the CB1 as well as CB2 receptors. Where we see that CB1 receptors are mostly responsible for neurotransmission. It's kind of what we associate with the effects of cannabis, the feeling of high and things like that. In contrast, CB2 receptors are where we see a lot of the immunological effects of the cannabinoids that occur throughout the body, and where we really see and kind of hope for the medical benefits, I think, kind of in the long term with these products. Now, we've learned that there's a couple of major endocannabinoids in the system, 2-AG and anandamide. And the way I like to kind of point out like what this system does. Imagine you're a newborn baby, right? And you've been fed through your umbilical cord your whole life, since you were growing, and then suddenly you're born and you need to learn to eat. So the endocannabinoid system is kind of responsible for training a newborn baby on how to eat because 2-AG, one of those major endocannabinoids, is present with large concentrations in breast milk. Now, when the baby suckles, what it does, it goes to those endocannabinoids stimulate the CB1 receptors in the brain that are responsible for, that feeling of reward. This feels good. I'm glad I'm doing it. But it also stimulates, the eating, this desire for appetite. And so, when we kind of think about why does the body have these systems, it makes sense when, you put it into a different context than kind of how we're using them today. So recognize that what we really learned about the endocannabinoid system and why it's called this is because we have a plant called cannabis that we learned when used by humans causes certain reactions. And of course, the most therapeutic interest up to this point has been on tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol, which are THC and CBD respectively. Although there's other cannabinoids, in the lab we've isolated like I think 122. But there's also terpenes that are part of the plant. And what I like about terpenes is it's the plant's mechanism to try to ward off pests and bugs, right? And so they're very aromatic. We know these like limonene or peonine you might associate with, citrus fruits, or peonine could be with pine trees. So, these are smells that really contribute to people's experiences with the cannabinoids. But remember, the plants have to be green, so there's chlorophyll in there, hydrocarbons, other things that it's not a single molecule plant, if you will, that we're used to dealing with when we talk about pharmacological agents. Now, the other thing I want to point out is people talk a lot, at least here in the United States, about the differences between indica and sativa. And while traditionally or historically, genetically, there's been a really large difference between these plants, they've been interbred, and partially simply because sativa loves to grow really big and tall and fast. It is a weed, as a matter of fact. And so because of that, people who are trying to grow a faster indica would crossbreed these things. And so, when we think about what are the common characteristics of sativa versus indica, we really can't say that anymore simply because genetically they're really not diverse. So I'm going to go into just quickly a little bit about the mechanisms of CBD, and we can talk about what it does with the cannabinoid receptors. Here you see a traditional synapse where when a stimulus comes in, it's going to release some neurotransmitters. But what CBD does when it's given systemically, it comes in and is able to, based on getting too much kind of message to that postsynaptic receptor, CBD will be present and aid in the quick synthesis of endocannabinoids. And then once those endocannabinoids are produced and released into the synapse, they're freely able to go back up and interact with that CB1 receptor, which is in turn going to kind of slow down the release of neurotransmitters from that presynaptic neuron. So this is kind of an indirect way in which to modulate the release of neurotransmitters. And so when we think about CBD's effect on the cannabinoids receptors, it's indirect, it's modulating the endocannabinoids, which therefore have their ability to kind of do what they naturally do in the body. So, but other mechanisms are very interesting when it comes to the CBD. One of the things that I see a lot of potential with is the adenosine A2A receptors, where we see a lot of these receptors in the periphery, and perhaps this is why it seems to work topically fairly well for inflammation and pain. It's also an agonist for TRP, and so therefore we'd see decrease in pain. An agonist for 5-HT1A receptors, which is kind of the mechanism we see with a pharmaceutical product named Boost Bar, where you might see a reduction in anxiety and depression, and inhibiting voltage-dependent anion channels, leading to a decrease in seizure activity. So that's CBD. But what about THC? So it's slightly different in the fact that when systemic THC is present in the body, that this is then able to freely associate and disassociate with that CB1 receptors directly. So it's not modulating the endocannabinoid system, but going right in and being an agonist at that receptor. Now, what's important to note is that particular signal that THC has is much stronger. It has a higher affinity than our body's own endocannabinoids. And so it's much more efficient at kind of turning off that presynaptic signal compared to what our endocannabinoids do. And so therefore we see kind of like a super therapeutic response. And that's why you see the feeling of high, where you don't necessarily from your endocannabinoids as much. And of course, this reaction is associated with decreases in pain, increases in appetite, appetite, decreases in memory, increases in psychosis and euphoria. But THC itself not only is interacting with your CB1 receptors, but other mechanisms such as it being an agonist for CB2, serotonin 3 receptors, mu and valenoid receptor. It's a heteromer. So when both of those receptors are working together, we see decreases in pain, as well as a heteromer for dopamine 2, where we see that increase in psychosis with some use. So based on this, what are people using these types of products for? So if you look at cannabis, tends to be very THC heavy or higher concentrations of THC, you see that the majority of patients are using it for chronic pain. And note that I have on there back and neck, that is also pain. But anxiety, depression, insomnia are also things that people will utilize THC for. In contrast, when we look at CBD type cannabis products, it's more kind of has this perception of, well, it's just kind of good for me. I'm going to use it for my well-being. This idea that it has, decreases inflammation, and inflammation being, the thing that leads to cell degradation and aging and so forth. I think that's why a lot of people are trying to use CBD, but also note they will be using it for chronic pain, anxiety, depression, insomnia. And we're going to cover those topics as I quickly move forward. So let's see what the evidence is. So one thing that if of anything that I want you to take away from this is this study about pain. This is a living systematic review on cannabis and other plant-based treatments for chronic pain. It is updated. This specific reference is updated every single month with all the data. And just to kind of tell you what they've done is they've already looked at the over 5,800 studies that are out there. Now, what's sad is that out of these 5,800 studies there's only 26 randomized controlled trials and only 12 observational studies that are actually worth reporting on. So we need to do a better job as scientists of creating better research that really gets to the answers that we need with regard to the use of cannabinoids for pain. Now, when you look overall to these studies, the majority of patients that are studied and reported out into these from these studies are patients who have neuropathic pain, and they're being treated only for short term, so maybe something between 1 to 6 months. And when you look at high THC to CBD ratio type products that are studied in these studies, you see that those that have high THC decrease pain severity, usually around the average of about 1.25 out of a 10-point scale. So there is significant decrease there, clinically significant, but it's not, of course, complete amelioration or doesn't completely get rid of the pain. Now, also in these studies, they report the likelihood of adverse effects. And so to achieve that decrease in pain severity, you see the relative risk of increasing sedation, dizziness, nausea, and vomiting can be there. Now, most of the studies that were reported out for high THC are based on the synthetic product, dronabinol. But there is a study that is included in there that has extracted plant products, and you can see the using the plant product has an increased risk of dizziness. Now, what I want to point out to you is that when you look at the next group, this is the comparable THC to CBD concentrations, okay? Lots of times when our patients here in the US walk into a dispensary, a lot of people say, hey, make sure you get something that has THC and CBD. The CBD will kind of offset some of the adverse effects of THC. But unfortunately, it also seems to kind of offset the benefits. And you see here that the average pain reduction is much less than that is reported out with just pure THC alone. And we see again increase in dizziness, sedation, and nausea. Now, Other patients people will say, well, just use CBD alone. And unfortunately, what you see here is there's no green here. So there's no evidence that it's actually doing anything. You see that the pain is kind of equivocal. It's not either going up or going down, and we don't really have any statistically significance. So it's really difficult for me to recommend CBD for pain when I know there's another product out there, high THC type cannabis, that can be helpful. So, what about insomnia? Well, we know THC decreases the time to fall asleep, but of course, it also decreases REM sleep, which we know will lead to changes in mood and memory. CBD seems to help, the majority of people with sleep ratings, but the dosages, we can't really, I can't help you there. They've ranged between 25 to 300 milligrams. And you have to note that some people will actually have worsening of sleeping. So if you are trying to utilize this product for a patient's insomnia, just be aware to make sure that it's not making them worse. As with pretty much any pharmacological product for sleep, the effects of it tend to wear off over time. Our body hates being told when to go to sleep. And so it's likely in all the studies that we've seen that it kind of wears off over time. Now, when it comes to treating anxiety with cannabis, THC can cause people to feel more relaxed within 20 minutes of inhalation, but when you look at the higher doses, that seems to lead to anxiety. And when we look across all the studies out there with anxiety, we do see that THC can show symptomatic improvement, but unfortunately, the quality of evidence is fairly low, and we really haven't figured out what the dosing for that is. So you might see patients reporting, I feel better on it, but you also might see people who don't, and we don't really know what the effect on the overall disease is over time. Now, when it comes to CBD, this can decrease some of the anxiety symptoms, but some of the things that we know that THC does well, such as changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and sweating, CBD doesn't seem to have an impact on that. The other thing is the dosings that are being studied with CBD are higher, typically, 300 milligrams. Most CBD products that we have here in the United States are much lower dosing. And we just have to be aware that there are data that shows that when people utilize cannabis early in life, this is associated with developing anxiety later in life. So it's difficult really to say what is happening, what's the short-term effects versus long-term effects when we talk about treating anxiety with cannabis. Now, I'm going to talk about nausea and vomiting. I know nobody said they used it in the previous studies, what I said for cannabis, but I think we're pretty aware of the fact that THC compared to kind of the dopamine agonist tends to work pretty well. The number needed to treat is not too bad at 3.4. Patients who do utilize it like it better, despite the fact that they report, some of them report depression, hallucinations, and paranoid delusions. People like smoking it because, they're not feeling good about trying to swallow any kind of capsules or oral products. And when we look at the newer studies that are looking at really high emetogenic chemotherapies, where patients are typically getting dexamethasone, and if they're given the dronabinol and ondansetron, dronabinol was actually equal to ondansetron in effectiveness. And you're probably thinking, well, that makes sense because you just told me a few minutes ago that THC effects can affect serotonin 3 receptors, and that's, of course, how ondansetron works. Also note that combining with dronabinol ondansetron with that dexamethasone does not make something more effective. It's kind of like you choose one or the other. So the last thing that I want to talk about is treating depression with cannabis. Now, a lot of people are trying to use this, and we see that patient data is coming mostly from retrospective reports from cannabis users saying, hey, if I utilize cannabis, my PHQ-9 has a bigger improvements when I'm being treated. But I want to tell you this. You know, when we look at a naturalistic study that actually came out of Canada, looking at patients that utilize cannabis for depression, anxiety, and stress. Now they're free to use either THC and CBD. They just report what they're using. What we find is if they're using the inhaled route, that 89% of these patients will have a 50% decrease in depressive symptoms. A big deal. A lot of people feel better in 20 minutes, right? When we look at anxiety, 90% have more than a 50% decrease in anxiety symptoms immediately after using the products, right? And interestingly enough, CBD was associated with the greatest changes in depression ratings. But note that the baseline symptoms in depression actually got worse over time. So despite the fact that our patients feel better within 20 minutes, they continue to decline in their depression. And that makes it really hard for me as a clinician when I'm talking to patients that have depressive symptoms and I'm saying, you know, I don't think your cannabis is helping you at all. They're like, oh no, you don't understand. Within 20 minutes, I feel better. And so it's very difficult to kind of work through that with the patient because it's like, yes, but you're hospitalized and you're not better. So, you know, we have to combine this with the fact that many national surveys show that people who utilize cannabis in younger ages have an increased likelihood of depression and suicidality over time. And so, to be honest with you, I pretty much tell all my patients who have any kind of mood disorder to really kind of stay away from cannabis. So, with that, I will thank you all and turn it over back to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Professor Franson, and thank you so much for the excellent presentation and for all the evidence regarding the use of cannabis in different clinical settings. We definitely have several questions, but we would like to address them at the end of the three presentations. So I would like to remind all of you to, if you have any questions, to address them through the Q&A box. So I've seen one of the questions that was mentioned in the chat. So please put it in the Q&A box and I will address it at the end of the three presentations. So thanks again. We will move forward to the second presentation. And it is my pleasure to present Dr. Carlos Lacava from the Medical Cannabis Program. He's the Cannabis Program Coordinator from the Ministry of Public Health in Uruguay. So Dr. Lacava is a pharmaceutical chemist and clinical biochemist from the Faculty of Chemistry of the University of the Republic, Uruguay. And he's also has a diploma in drug policies from the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of Republic. So it's my pleasure to leave you the floor for you to present the medical cannabis, the roles, responsibilities, and challenges for pharmacists. So the floor is yours, and please go ahead with the presentation.
Hello, good morning for everybody. Good morning or good afternoon for everybody. I know there is people from every part of the world. Here now in Uruguay, it is midday. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I want to acknowledge FIP people for allowing me here to be here with you. We are going to talk about the responsibilities, the roles, and the challenges for pharmacists using medicine cannabis. As I don't know if I can. Yes. As with all other medicines, we have a group of responsibilities and roles as pharmacists to achieve. But cannabis presents us some different and specials due to its particularities, to its particularities. At least three important aspects add when we are to the problem when we are talking about cannabis. First is what patients wait for the use of cannabis. There are many people that had high expectations about the use of cannabis. Others are a bit afraid of using cannabis. So that add some points that the pharmacist has to work, especially when educate and counsel patients. Another aspect is what we have been seeing recently, that the little evidence for certain aspects in the use. So we have to be very specific and very and move with a lot of precision in when we are trying to give solutions to our patients. And the other great problem we have, I think, is that nowadays there are still a lot of medical doctors, a lot of physicians that have some bias about using cannabis with their patients. So it is a complex group of medicines to use, but it has a lot of potential, especially so because of what we have been recently, because of the large number of properties and the large aspects that covers the endocannabinoid system. When we are with the patient, we have a lot of things to inform and about to educate and console it, the same as with others drugs and a bit more. Of course, we have to inform about the different dosage forms, which in cannabis sometimes are a bit different of the common ones, the methods of administration, and the potential effects, especially the potential adverse effects. But we have to try to advise the patient that for one side, this is a medicament. This is a medicine compound. Not because sometimes people assume that it is natural, it's a natural product, so if it's natural, it's safe. So first thing that we have to convince and to say to our patient is that, okay, yes, it is a natural product, but that's not means that it have not some other effects. It can have adverse effects. It can have interactions with other drugs. And on the other hand, we have another kind of patients that believes that cannabis is a kind of medicament that is good for everything, and can solve any problem, especially these aspects related with well-being and wellness that is related to CBD. But another again, we have to tell our patients that everything is into some kind of relative form, and not any people can use cannabis. We have to take into account that there are some conditions that made that it is avoided to use cannabis. For instance, people with previous problems of mental health, it's not advisable that use cannabis in their therapy. And we have to take all that into account when we are counseling our patients, and especially in another hand, to explain them about the fears that sometimes people have about the using of a product that it is related to addiction problems. So we have to explain which is the risk of addiction, why it is useful to take cannabis, and why people to take cannabis is not means that you can become addicted to it. So these points I was telling here, they are the same points, that we have a lot of indications, and we have to analyze that if that the problem our patient is can be treated with a cannabis product or not. Of course, we have to take into account like the interactions and the contraindications with other medicaments. We must remember that cannabinoids in general are metabolized in the liver, and so they have a lot of interactions with many other medicaments that also have liver metabolism. As we have seen, it is very difficult sometimes to be sure how to advise our patient because of the limited clinical evidence. There are a lot of studies, but all the studies are different. They take different methodology, they use different products, and that make that results cannot be take all into account at the same time. We have to be very careful when we are trying and to resume and to use all this evidence. Another problem we have to take into account when we are with patients is that there is a lot of a quite variable, there are quite many different products and many different quality of the same products. So it is very important that we can say to our patients which product they are taking and why they should go with this product, or when they don't find this product, which one can they substitute? Because not all the products are the same, even when they have the same concentration of the principal cannabinoid, the main cannabinoid. Sometimes there can be differences in the other components of the products. And it is a challenge for us that cannabinoids products are not yet introduced into standard care protocols. They are still not very clear, not very clear. There are really very different ways of using cannabinoids, and this creates some problem when we are trying to advise our patients. Yeah, we have three of the problems that sometimes our patients refers to us. The problems that about the safety that the patients have. And again, I repeat, some patients are feel that cannabis is safe because it's natural. Some others have a lot of fear because it's a potential drug of abuse. And well, we have to explain very well to our patients what we know about this use, why they can be safe using cannabis, and how this can be very useful or not for their health. And we need to be constantly in touch with prescriptors, with the physicians that prescribe, because it's important to know, to have a good relationship with them, and little by little to go on taking this sensation of fear that sometimes physicians have against using cannabis. Cannabis is a very good medicine in some specific ways, take it in some specific ways also, but it's not for any case and whatever in whatever situation. Here, for instance, in Uruguay, we have problem also, and I think that is in all the all over the world, that there are many. There are some relationships or some cannabinoids, specific cannabinoids, or a specific combination of cannabinoids we have not ready for being given to patients. So we are limited in this case. We have not all the possibilities ready to be used. And sometimes there are patients, as it is a natural product, and sometimes they know something that cultivate for them our recreational use. They use not medical quality, not pharmaceutical cannabis quality products, so that it's also a problem. This is what I wanted you to know. I think that we are in time. Thank you very much, and well, I am ready to ask you questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lacava, and thank you for shedding light on different challenges that face the pharmacists regarding their role and responsibilities in the use and prescription of medical cannabis. So we will leave the questions until the end of the presentation, the third presentation, and we will definitely address many of the points that you highlighted. So we will discuss them in a while after the presentation of Dr. Saini. Okay, thank you so much. So we will move forward with our third presentation for today, and with Dr. Bandana Saini. So Professor Saini is a health service researcher. She's mainly focused on pharmacy-based respiratory and sleep health services. And she has led many pharmacy-based services and service trials in Australia and collaborated internationally. As I previously said, unfortunately, Dr. Bandana is not live with us due to time differences since she's in Australia. But we will play the pre-recorded video she sent us, and we will wrap up after her video. Thank you so much.
Greetings to all my colleagues on this webinar, and this webinar is about can we, as pharmacists, cannabis it, really scoping pharmacists' views and experiences on the supply of medicinal cannabis around the globe. So my name is Bandana Saini, and I'm an academic pharmacist at the University of Sydney in Australia. So I thought we'd begin with a quick snapshot of how regulatory frameworks have evolved over time. So we know that traditionally there was free use of cannabis across many countries, particularly in South Asia, Southeast Asia. And then the use of cannabis actually became widespread, went across the globe, particularly to Western countries. And at this point in time, in the early 20th century, cannabis products were sometimes also listed on official pharmacopoeias, for example, the US Pharmacopoeia and the British Pharmacopoeia. But with this increasing use, also became quite evident that there were adverse impacts and risks that are associated with the use of cannabis. And at this point, many governments and policymakers decided to have very restrictive and prohibitive policies where access to or possession of cannabis was considered illegal. And this was really cemented by the UN Single Convention on the Control of Narcotic Drugs, which in 1961 ranked cannabis and cannabis resin in Schedule 1 and 4, which is really the highly controlled substances. Nonetheless, the research on cannabinoids has continued and looking at generating evidence for particular medical conditions for various cannabinoids, and it continued across the time Till about the late 1990s and early 2000, it became quite evident to many different governments across the world that perhaps, restricting use to cannabis led people to seek illicit ways of obtaining cannabis and increase the risk, particularly for vulnerable sections of the population. And so in a harm reduction approach, many countries, Netherlands was probably the first one, that then started to decriminalize and have accessible policies to allow consumers to use, high quality cannabis products for medicinal purposes, for example. And many other countries followed suit: Canada, France, UK, Italy, countries, that then also legalized cannabis at that point in time in the early 2000s. In 2016, seeing this increasing trend of cannabis use, the UN General Assembly, that called a special session on the world drug problem, recommended that perhaps globally these restrictive policies need to be reviewed. And then in 2019, the World Health Organization's expert committee on drugs of dependence recommended that they be removed from the Schedule 4 that they had been placed in by the UN Convention on Narcotic Drugs Control in 2020. The UN Convention actually accepted these recommendations, which really has been a signaled, era of accessibility for medicinal cannabis for consumers. So D'Souza et al. Actually did a really comprehensive review looking at about 36 countries and 193 sovereign states to see what sort of regulatory frameworks exist around the globe. And they found that in the countries that they could review, 71% of countries actually still have restrictive policies, whereas 8% are starting to work to have more accessible policies put in place, and 20% of these countries or states actually have policies for the access for consumers to cannabis. And if you dissect these 20% out even further, you look at these three shades, the golden, purple, and lime green. The 19% of countries in this golden shaded share of the pie chart allow access to regular registered cannabinoid-based medicines that are part of the conventional regulatory pathways and are registered on that country's therapeutic goods register. 35% of the countries in this purple shaded share of the pie allow access to cannabis preparations that have not gone through the conventional registration pathway, so they're unregistered products, unregistered medicines, but the supply is mandated under medical supervision in a medical model, implying a prescription and dispensing. In 43% of these countries in the lime green bar, there are access policies outside the conventional medicines pathways that then also include herbal cannabis or complementary preparations of cannabis. So if you look at the shading of the world, according to these different types of policies, we can see the countries that fall into that purple realm, where they do allow unregulated medicine access in a medical model. Countries in the golden shade that only allow registered products to be made available, and the green shaded countries which allow more open-ended accessibility of cannabis that includes herbal cannabis to their consumers. D'Souza et al. Also looked at how are these different policies then put into place, how are they implemented, and many factors may play a role here. Some of them are listed. So some countries will have policies around cultivation, they would allow it. And of course, Australia, Canada, Chile, Germany, Mexico, UK, Netherlands, Uruguay, Italy, all of these are countries that allow cultivation. And most of the countries that allow cultivation then also have pathways for licensed production, that you take the raw materials, the cultivated plants are harvested and converted into formulations of pharmaceutical grade. Some of them will just import ready-made formulations that are made accessible. Some countries like Brazil do not allow cultivation, but they will actually import raw materials, the raw plant, and actually manufacture in their own country for their own purposes. Distribution is another way of control. So some countries have an open-ended model for distribution, so wholesalers are able to source or procure medicinal cannabis or other cannabis products and supply it to the relevant outlets. In some countries, it's quite centralized. So Italy is an example where the military actually controls the cultivation, harvesting, transport, and distribution centrally for everything related to cannabis. Of course, in some countries, only registered products are allowed. Other countries will allow both registered and unregistered products. Some will allow registered, unregistered, and complementary or herbal products. Some countries will impose product specs or specifications, for example, limit the amount of the proportion of cannabinoids, certain cannabinoids in a preparation, or mandate that only certain types of preparations can be made available. Maybe these are tinctures or capsules, etc. Others will have standards for, impose standards, quality standards for any products, registered or unregistered, that are made available for consumers. In most of these countries, regardless of having a model that might allow even herbal cannabis for recreational, or other use, there's still a medical system in place for the registered products as well as unregistered medicinal products, which means that pharmacies around the world do have a significant role to play in ensuring safe and quality use of medicinal cannabis products for consumers. So if you look at the global literature, and there have been about 15, 20 research articles on pharmacists' opinions around medicinal cannabis or cannabis supply. Very hard to distill in 15 minutes, but overall, the pharmacists appear to be confident particularly in regulated products, because they have been tested, met all of the criteria for registration. But there's also general support for accessibility of medicinal cannabis. So pharmacists feel that patients who might not benefit from regular medications might actually benefit from medicinal cannabis, and in this instance they should have access. But there's a lot of clinical uncertainty, particularly about the unregulated products, and an express need for training. There's a lack of comfort regardless of which type of medicinal cannabis product is being dispensed. This probably stems from concerns that have been raised about the potential for abuse, the drug interactions that might be possible, and also adverse drug reaction or events. There's also confusion because most of the regulatory pathways across countries are quite complex, and pharmacists find them hard to navigate. And there indeed have been calls that this is quite an involved process, particularly if you are procuring products that meet quality standards, that you might be compounding them, you have to decide on the formulations specifics. Then there should be remunerable models for pharmacists to be able to undertake this role. In Australia, in 2016, the Narcotics Act was amended, although we could not do this in the early 2000s when other countries were doing it, and at that point in 2016, medicinal cannabis was legalized, and pathways for cultivation, manufacture, and supply were outlined. And there's been a high level of public advocacy, particularly from parents of children with issues such as intractable epilepsy, who've had to source cannabis through illicit means in the past. And this has led to a parliamentary inquiry about barriers to access of medicinal cannabis as well in 2020, which then reported recommendations to the government to improve. So the current scenario is that about 300 products, unregulated mainly, are available in a wide variety of formulation types. There are 2 medicinal cannabis products that are registered on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods by the Therapeutic Goods Administration of Australia. And these are Sativex, that's a nabiximol that's indicated for multiple sclerosis, and it's a spray. Epidiolex, which is indicated for epileptic conditions such as Dravet syndrome. And interestingly, Epidiolex is also on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, which means that there's subsidized access in terms of costs for patients who might need to use this. Looking at different schedules like many countries, Australia has schedules which categorizes drugs based on the level of control that needs to be exercised in their supply. So Schedule 8 is controlled drugs, and formulations with more than 2% of tetrahydrocannabinol would fall here, as would nabiximols, nabilone, dronabinol, and the cannabis plant. Formulations that contain at least 98% of cannabidiol, CBD, which is the less psychoactive cannabinoid, are in the general prescription category, Schedule 4. And then based on the parliamentary inquiry and review, very soon after that, the TGA also created a Schedule 3, which implies non-prescription based but pharmacist handled supply of medicinal cannabis for products that would be, containing up to a maximum of 150 milligrams of cannabidiol. But the proviso was that they had to be registered on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. So even though this pathway has been open, there are actually no products on pharmacy shelves in Australia that are available for consumers. From a prescribing point of view, prescribers can actually, for unregulated medicinal cannabis, use the special access scheme, where you can either notify the Therapeutic Goods Administration that you're prescribing medicinal cannabis for patients seriously ill or terminally ill, or more commonly the SAS pathway, B pathway, which is the pathway where a prescriber might get permission to prescribe in the case of patients where the regular registered or indicated products are not meeting the patient's need. A far more accessible pathway is the authorized prescriber, where if a prescriber is regularly having to prescribe medicinal cannabis because he's seeing a particular kind of patient that they're prescribing it for example, those who specialize in epilepsy or pain, then they can apply to be an authorized prescriber, and then they don't have this individual applications that require to be made. And of course, there's a clinical trials access, which many countries would also have. So to date, the authorized prescriber pathway has really taken off. We compare from 2018 up to 2024, and even overtaken the SAS Special Access Scheme Part B type pathway. So there's 165,000 prescription applications that were made under the authorized prescribing pathway in 2024. So clearly, there's a significant amount of medicinal cannabis being prescribed, which clearly means Australian pharmacists have to enact a role in this case. Given that, you have to receive and check prescriptions for their, accuracy, clinical, relevance, and then procure the drug. Because it's not the conventional wholesale pathway that you can actually get these medicines as you do your regular registered medicine. You might have to research and find which product is available by which manufacturer, and does it meet the TGA's quality control standards for medicinal cannabis products, even if they're unregulated, and then actually have the clinical consultation with the patient and or the referral with the prescriber. So all pharmacies have to be involved, but there are indeed pharmacies that have taken to, being specialists in medicinal cannabis. So a regular pharmacy, if a pharmacist feels they don't really have the skill or the time to research and find products and supply them, they might refer the prescription to a specialized pharmacy to do that for them. In a survey of about 217 pharmacists very recently published, most of them had experience with dispensing, if not a large amount, at least a few medicinal cannabis prescriptions in the period they were asked to report on. But only half were comfortable, only a third were confident about their clinical counseling skills with consumer. Only a fourth said or reported that they felt comfortable with the regulatory complexity. About 3/4 of the sample also felt that there was still stigma attached with the use of medicinal cannabis, and 60% did support the non-prescription supply of cannabidiol as per the Schedule 3 that I highlighted earlier for patients. So challenges, there are, of course, adverse events that have been reported. So about 1,297 adverse drug reactions reported in 550 case reports. There's also in Australia a similar hesitancy to prescribe and a similar expressed need for more clinical awareness by general practitioners. Of course, when you have 300 products and you have to check the quality control of all of these for use as a large regulatory cost. Patients still might be accessing medicinal cannabis via prescription pathway, as well as from other, non-medical based pathways as well. And the health regulation don't necessarily add up with other state regulation. For example, driving under whilst you're still on using a product with tetrahydrocannabinol might be considered an offense in some states. Some states you're in one territory, Australian Capital Territory, you're allowed to possess a little amount of cannabis, so 50 grams of dried product or 150 grams of fresh, or have 4 plants that you can cultivate for personal use per household. But that's not the case in other states, so it becomes quite complex to navigate. So overall, if we look at the globally putting together the picture, what are the challenges? So there is a really strongly expressed need for more training on clinical aspects of medicinal cannabis, and many researchers have called for its inclusion of this topic in pre-registration curricula, as well as a topic in continuing education discussions. There are calls for having more practice resources. So if these medicines are in an unregulated pathway, then they are not included in standard reference texts. And pharmacists need to check up dosing, adverse drug reactions, drug interactions, pharmacokinetics, and they really want to have this information in an accessible format. There's definitely calls for simplifying the regulatory pathway so that it makes it easier for pharmacists to access and supply and be confident in the provision of medicinal cannabis products for their patients. All pharmacists that have been surveyed in many different research studies have endorsed the need for more clinical trials and research, so that more evidence is generated, and that perhaps some of these unregulated products can then be shifted into the regulated stream of products that can be used. And this calls for also well-designed consumer and health professional awareness campaigns, particularly to destigmatize the use of medicinal cannabis, whilst providing very balanced risk versus benefits information for both consumers and health professionals. So that's where the field is at the moment. I'm very grateful to a range of colleagues across the globe who've done research on this topic, and I acknowledge them by citing these references, which I included in the discussion as well. And I thank everybody for attending.
So it was a really, really interesting presentation from Dr. Saimi, and we were happy to to see different perspectives from the Australian experience and the different maybe challenges that could be addressed. And the last slide regarding education and the need for more research is really like eye-opening, and it is really important to shed the light on this. On these challenges. So here we are with the last section related to the Q&A questions and the tool. So I would like to ask our two presenters. So yeah, Dr. Franson and Dr. Lacava, Mr. Lacava, could you please? Yeah, thank you so much. So now that we are with the Q&A, so we have some question that has been already addressed in the Q&A. So thank you, Professor Franson, for that. But I have a couple of more questions from the audience and from myself. So for everyone, if you'd like to have some more questions, please use the Q&A tool to address these questions, and we will try to discuss them with our presenters. So maybe I will start with Professor Franson. So as you have seen in the chat box and the Q&As, so many questions are related to the use of cannabis and cannabinoids in the pain settings. So maybe we could, there's a question related to the therapeutic doses that can be used, whether for some specific pain settings like neuropathic pain or musculoskeletal pain. So can you tell us what evidence do we have regarding the therapeutic doses that should be used in these pain settings? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's beneficial is it's very easy for us to set up clinical pharmacological studies to evaluate THC and pain, and many have been done, 160, 170, something along these lines. So we're able to definitively say that in like normal healthy volunteers, we can see the beginnings of pain relief with small doses of like 1 to 2 milligrams, and that this probably can increase up to about 10 milligrams, 15 milligrams before you really start to see significant adverse effects. And so therefore, in patient populations, what does that mean? You're probably going to want to start with dosages of around 1 to 2 milligrams, probably, no more than 5. It all depends on whether or not your patient is naive to cannabis, because it is something that they will develop tolerance to. And then you have to also consider whether or not the patient is older, would have, because these drugs are liver metabolized, and our tolerance of physiologically goes down as we age. Certainly worried about the risk of falls and things like that. In an older patient, which is the exploding population here in the United States who are utilizing cannabis, that you want to be starting with, something like 0.5 milligram to 1 milligram, just to see how they tolerate it. And I know this is not definitive dose recommendations that we're used to as pharmacists coming from drug companies, but this is a very tricky drug to give orally.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just a lot of variability. Every time you give it, you're depending on how much fat you have in your system, not that you've eaten, not how fat you are, but depending on like your diet, that you can really have several fold differences in how much is absorbed. And so this makes it an incredibly tricky drug to dose, unfortunately.
Okay, so since you discussed about safety and the variability that could occur depending on the patient, so and you made a very, very interesting review comparison on the use of CBD versus THC. Would you believe that it is safer, for example, to start with the patient on pain? Let's talk about pain, for example. Would you believe it is safer to start for a patient with pain on CBD rather than THC, since they have like more side effects?
Yeah. Well, this is what's
Exactly.
crazy. You read a lot of these review articles and position statements from different groups, and they review all the data that shows that THC works for pain, and that CBD really hasn't been shown that it works for pain. And yet they say, so start with CBD because it's safer. And I just don't understand that. I don't ever recommend a drug that doesn't work to anybody, even if it is safer. It's like, here, eat carrots for your pain. Okay, well, carrots are great, but why would I do that? So I think the safer route is just to start very low with the THC and see if your patient tolerates it. And of course, if they don't, then you will probably want to look for other pain reducing, products versus something like, I mean, you could try CBD, but there's just little evidence that it universally works for patients.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I will go with Dr. Lacava. I have a question for you regarding, you said you discussed a lot about the potential interactions, especially on metabolism of this cannabis with other drugs. Can you like highlight the key considerations for pharmacists regarding managing potential interactions between the medical cannabis and some commonly prescribed medications, so that the pharmacist could go with some keynotes regarding the main interactions with these two?
Well, there are a lot of interactions, and depends on what, of course, what are you treating in the patient, and what, of course, what are drugs that are taken. But for instance, sometimes can be seen interactions between cannabinoids and anticoagulants and with other kind of more or less everything that is metabolized in liver by cytochrome P450, there are interactions.
Okay, but may I ask you, because since sometimes we use the medical applications to use the drug interaction checkers and so on, but medical cannabis is not always introduced in these tools. So can you give us, for example, a medical tool for the interaction checking, or eventually like a resource, a good resource that the pharmacist can have to check the interactions for their patients? Do you suggest some of these tools or some of these at least resources, references, so we can check for interactions?
I don't know any that has include now all the interactions between cannabinoids and other drugs. So it is to be very careful and to think how is the metabolism of the two drugs and how is the probability of interaction. But up to the moment, I don't know any confident, any
Reliable resource tool.
reliable.
Yeah.
I don't know if Dr. Franson knows something.
Yeah, it's just constantly just new data coming out that you have to keep up with. I don't have a definitive resource either. I think
Yeah.
the one thing that I always do like to mention though, in when asked this question is THC causes, in pretty much everybody who uses it, a 19 beat per minute increase in heart rate, right?
Right.
And so with this, we have to be mindful of patients who are on stimulants, patients who are on anticholinergics, that this can lead to, their feeling of racing heart and panic and adverse effects from this pharmacodynamic drug interaction that we know with THC and drugs such as stimulants.
Yeah, and I guess we could we should do something with the FIP to come up with a roadmap maybe for a document with the drug interaction checking and maybe the counseling thing that any pharmacist should have in his pocket to better counsel a patient with the medical use of cannabis. So yeah, I guess this is something that would be interesting to do together. I guess also we can discuss a little bit, since we're talking about evidence, and all through the three presentations, we said that we have limited evidence regarding the efficacy and safety, and we need more research, and we need more elaborative maybe evidence to have more like an evidence-based practice. So what do you think, both of you? How do you think that with this rapid evolving area of research and evidence, first, what are the resources, how we can have like training session that the pharmacists could seek to ensure they will remain up to date regarding this evolving evidence? And even one question from the audience stated, what is necessary to do to obtain evidence that is solid enough, not simply have low to moderate evidence? So what do you think can be done to improve this area and to be up to date as pharmacists to this evolving area? Maybe we could start with Professor Franson, please.
Sure. So to answer your question about the evidence, one of the problems is actually very few pharmacists are doing a lot of the research. And, people are simply saying, oh, I gave my patient access to cannabis. We don't know how much gets in. There's not pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic relationships with the responses. So the level of evidence is really poor in studies being done by people who don't understand pharmacokinetics. I mean, this is really painful to me to when somebody gives, let's say, even a sub-therapeutic dose and says it doesn't work. Well, of course it doesn't. You can't, you have to give something that you think is going to work. So I think there's just a lot of poorly designed studies, and the world needs our expertise. And I think the first question you ask is how do pharmacists get educated on this? And I think part of it is recognizing that 90 million people worldwide use this product on a daily basis. And so it's not legal in my country. It's not, depending on the state, pharmacists are either involved or completely prohibited from being involved. And I think it's time that we stop focusing on like provision of drug and or product, and think more about how do I counsel this person to use this product wisely and safely. They might not be getting it from me, but I have to take the responsibility of helping them do this as best as possible, because that's what I find. Like, I'm never involved in giving out cannabis, but I counsel people constantly on how to try and get the best benefit if they're trying to go for benefit, how to stay safe while doing it, how to, avoid side effects and so forth. So I think part of it is up to us to take responsibility and seize this information and do what we can to learn what we can, as much as we can, to help this large population who are seeking and are hopeful that this product is going to be helpful for them. It may not be, but we need to take that responsibility.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Dr. Lacava, would you like to add something to how to like help pharmacists have the tool or to stay updated with the evolving area of expertise
Well,
regarding?
yes, I think that it is field that is moving very fast, and the new information is coming very, very fast and in very, very great quantity. And we have to be updated, but we have to have in mind that several times we move in a certain similar field when we use regulated drugs and approved drugs for use out of label. That is this something that has not as many evaluation and as many certainty behind, but can be used with certain satisfying in certain way that is useful for patients. So we have to have that in mind in this case also.
Yeah, excellent. Maybe I would like to end up with a question that is really important, because you are pharmacists from different parts of the world, and the experience regarding the use of medical cannabis is completely different among countries. We have seen the Australian experience where pharmacists can receive, revise, deliver, provide counseling regarding that. In some other countries, I would like to talk, for example, about Canada, where patients can obtain cannabis and cannabinoids outside of the pharmacy system, so it's not regulated through pharmacies and so on. So how do you think we could, like, as pharmacists, advocate our role? Because at the end, we are the main people who are responsible of the medical use of cannabis, if I can say so. And we have the most important knowledge to do so. So how do you think we can navigate through the challenges in managing medical cannabis and address any potential misuse or misinformation while it's not going through our system and our pharmacies? So how do you think we could like address this challenge to end up with this during this presentation? Dr. Franson, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so, this is exactly kind of the approach that the Pharmacist Cannabis Coalition of California, the group I'm a part of. So pharmacists are completely out of cannabis in California. It's available recreationally. People can just walk into a dispensary and talk to what we call bud tenders, and they will, do not have the knowledge to help patients appropriately. And so, many people are trying to fight the legalization of cannabis from a national point of view. We don't think that's our space. Our space is simply to make it, imperative for the Board of Pharmacy in California to have pharmacists get this knowledge, be educated, and, not feel like they can't talk about something that is not allowed, right? It's like, yes, you can counsel people, you have the knowledge. So I think that is one of the major areas, is advocating with pharmacy on what we can do even when the product remains not available. You know, if it should change one day, great, but we as pharmacists are probably not going to move that law and change that law. It's going to be up to others. So let's focus on the practice of pharmacy, and what we're allowed to do there versus changing kind of its position in the government.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Lacava, maybe you'd like to add some quick word?
I am totally d'accord with Dr. Franson. We have to advocate for being the ones that counsel patients about medical use of cannabis. Medical use of cannabis must be in pharmacy as well as other medicaments. It's not such difference between another kind of medicament, so why it have to be outside pharmacy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So with that, I guess we can close up the Q&A session. So if you allow me, we will wrap up and have the final word and conclusion. So the main maybe take-home message that I could have, that we need definitely better research for evidence-based practice, especially for different clinical settings, to have more benefits, to have more comprehension of the whole use of medical cannabis. We have to understand the different forms, methods of administration, and the pharmacist plays a real important role to identify patients with contraindications, the main side effects, what are the interactions, as you said, to avoid any abuse, use disorder, or eventually any safety issue that, especially that you have misinformation related to that. And finally, maybe the main point is that we need more clinical trials, more research, and we need more evidence. And definitely we need to do more as pharmacists to enhance the knowledge, to enhance the education, whether the continuing education or during their pharmacy studies. So we have a lot to do, and hopefully during other sessions we could discuss more and work with the FIP to deliver some evidence-based document that pharmacists can use during their practice to ensure the safe and to ensure safety and efficacy of medical use among patients. So with that, I would like to finally say that don't forget that the recording of this episode will be made available on the www.fip.org, and you can provide any feedback to webinars@fip.org, so FIP may continue to improve their digital event offerings. And you can visit events.fip.org for all future events. And one last quick word before we close our meeting for today. Please give a note about the FIP Congress 2025 that will happen in Copenhagen, Denmark, from August 31 to September 3rd. So it's related to pharmacy forward, performance, collaboration, and health transformation. So hopefully we will see all of you there. And just to say that this Congress will have 3 main sub-themes. The first one would be to make it sustainable. The second one to be making the system work. And the third sub-theme is about making it personal. So just some important dates before we close. So January 8 would be the abstract submission open. March 17 is the abstract submission deadline. Then the early registration fee deadline is set on June 2nd. And August 11 would be the second registration deadline. But you can find more information about the Congress on the link you can find, or eventually you can scan the QR code in here. So thank you so much for attending. Thank you again for all our speakers, Dr. Franson, Dr. Lacava. Thank you so much for the brilliant presentations and for the beautiful discussion today. And if you have anything to add, we have a couple of minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. Otherwise, I think we could like end up, and thank everyone for listening and for attending this beautiful webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.